This is the Venezuelan embassy here in London. But is that nation heading for civil war? It's more politically and economically unstable than at any time since 1999, the year in which Hugo Chavez assumed the presidency. It's all in the context of dropping oil prices, but other factors are at play as well. Because what is at stake is not simply control over Venezuela's vast oil reserves. It's also a profound test of that country's revolutionary democratic experience. It's claimed ex-ministers are conspiring with right-wing agitators to overthrow the constitutional president, Nicolas Maduro. These factions have tried to portray the lethal violence as state repression and evidence of the dictatorship that they aim to topple. The mainstream media has echoed this version of events, using titles like "Venezuelan regime has blood on its hands" and "Venezuela's Tiananmen moment", some even accusing Maduro of state genocide. Maduro himself is seeking elections for what's known as a constituent assembly to bring democratic order to the country. A number of commentators and citizens argue opposition forces won't and can't convert themselves into a viable political force for the majority of the population. Meanwhile, anti-Chavista violence is aimed at public infrastructure, schools, hospitals, popular markets, food shortage deposits, electricity infrastructure, public transport, and government institutions. Hate crimes against suspected Chavista supporters and attacks on military bases have added to the crisis. Many people argue it all adds up to regime change, with support from Washington and the Western media as Venezuela sinks towards anarchy. What can stop the violence in Venezuela? And how much has this crisis got to do with that country's huge oil reserves? Simple questions with important answers. A helicopter flown by a police officer was seen dropping grenades on the Supreme Court and the Interior Ministry. Why does the international community ignore such violence against the Venezuelan state? We put that to the public in Venezuela.
The war is being facilitated through the media because they know that with weapons they cannot win. They apply economic sabotage, distort the news, trying to influence young people and the most vulnerable Venezuelans.
Since this event happened, the government has not yet captured Oscar Perez. Where is the intelligence of the country? A single man has mocked the government. He rode his helicopter, which belongs to our country, all over Caracas, and they did not capture him. That to me seems like a smokescreen.
As Venezuelans, we should protest against that. But he is part of a group that opposes this governmental system that, from my point of view, has failed in the economic, political, social, and cultural sense. The big chains of communication are in charge of turning very repeated lies into truths, but their lies have spread.
It should not have been. I do not know why the international media say anything about them. It may be supporting opponents.
We have seen how the Organization of American States, the OAS, has taken side with the opposition, which is wrong because they are supposed to mediate between the opposition and the government. We have seen sort of like mild opposition from some sort of countries, but most of them have been trying to take sides with the opposition. This guy who bombed the Supreme Court had been the pilot of a former defense minister who lost his job a couple of years ago and who has become part of the opposition. So it's no coincidence that a few days before this bombing happened, he gave some interviews to right-wing media in Miami talking about the collapse of the system in Venezuela. So we are talking about a clear coordination between international elements and what happened with this helicopter. At the same time, the problem we have at the moment is that there's a lot of misinformation about the situation in Venezuela, which means that the international community has decided not to sort of come up with a kind of solution which will enable the opposition and the government to restart a dialogue and find a solution for this problem. So yes, in that respect, the Organization of American States has clearly taken sides not only with the opposition, but by instructions from the US. It is President Trump who's actually been sort of moving the puppets President Trump and Canada trying to put down the government there. And that's quite a disgraceful attitude from the international community. But yes, the problem we have at the moment is the level of misinformation that exists in relation to Venezuela.
The international media, first of all, did not ignore it. They reported it. I think they reported it to try to suggest that this was the end of the government. That was the first narrative, the first reporting. And then later on, they concocted a story that, you know, this was organized somehow by the government. Later on, we all knew that this was a lie. I think the international community, as you refer to, is many governments in the world that support the objectives, or at least the positions of the United States regarding Venezuela, which is to overthrow the government. And to have condemned this terrorist attack, which is what it was, terrorist attack, would have challenged the narrative that they've been putting forward for some time. Namely that these people who are fighting against the Maduro government are Democrats who will not use violence, and to condemn this terrorist activity would have actually destroyed that narrative, complicated it certainly. I think that's the reason why they did it. There's no question about it. They shot 15 times on the Ministry of Interior. And there were 80 people on the terrace of the building of the Ministry of Interior organizing a reception to give prizes for the best journalists of the year. And then they threw the grenades onto the Supreme Court right at the moment when all the judges of the Supreme Court actually were in session. And in the two buildings where hundreds of workers were still working. So this was intended to cause the maximum number of casualties. I think that's why what you call the international community decided to ignore it.
What can be done to stop the current violence in Venezuela? Here's the view of the Venezuelan public.
A call for great national dialogue has been made, a call for the Constitutional Assembly, which is on the way, and we hope that this brings us that prolonged peace and economic development that we are so much in need of right now.
There should be a negotiation, and in all negotiations you have to give a little in order to obtain a solution. In Venezuela, I think the radicals on both sides have blocked this negotiation, and the government, the mature president, should give a little more. He is supposed to be the leader of Venezuela, the president.
I believe that to eradicate violence, we have a contract that is the Constitution, and yet no one has respected it. The government at first, having all the country's powers, have not respected it, and everyone else has done the same and not respected it.
There must be a dialogue, but how can you have a dialogue with people who describe us as terrorists? The people who oppose that line or philosophical doctrine, which is socialism of the 21st century.
We have had a shortage of many products, and there can be no peace. We have lack of medicines, food, and insecurity is killing us. People have an instability that is not good for peace or tranquility. To stop violence, there must be dialogue on both sides.
The only way is to restart the dialogue. The opposition abandoned the dialogue in December last year, and President Maduro has more than once said that he would like to restart the dialogue. In fact, a few days ago, he reiterated his call for a dialogue. But the opposition, the problem we have at the moment is the opposition has been taken over by the most violent elements. Not everybody is violent in the opposition, but the most violent elements, the most radical far-right elements of the opposition have taken control of the opposition. And those moderates who would like to restart a dialogue with the government cannot do it because they are being cornered or harassed by the most sort of extreme members of the opposition. For as long as that situation remains, it's going to be very difficult for the government to be able to sit down, because even if some people in the opposition agreed to sit down with the government, they wouldn't be representing most of the opposition anywhere. And there's a sector in the opposition which want to bring the government down. They don't have any other point in their agenda but to bring in the government down. So the only way would be that the dialogue, which was sponsored by former head of states of Spain, Dominican Republic, and Panama, could start again. They can find an agenda in which they can agree and then move towards stopping the violence. But the priority at the moment is stopping the violence, and there won't be any chances for this to happen for as long as the opposition decides not to talk to the government. The only way is a dialogue. There is no other solution for Venezuela at the moment.
Most of the opposition, in my view, is encouraged, funded and organized by the United States. Between 2002 and 2013-14, the United States, through the National Endowment for Democracy, International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute, and several other agencies, channeled to opposition outfits, political parties, media, NGOs so-called, and civil associations of the Venezuelan opposition, something in the region of $120 million. They're still sending them money. And if you were to bring this to the scale of the UK, this would be something in the region of £1 billion, £1 billion. Imagine a hostile government giving £1 billion to organizations in the UK that wanted to overthrow the government and the democracy of the nation. This is absolutely incredible. And what the point I'm making is this: were the United States to tell the opposition that, they should go for peaceful means, they will do it immediately. And that's why President Maduro decided to actually call for a constituent assembly, because it's the only way, as far as he is concerned, that is going to stop the violence. For as long as the opposition are encouraged by external forces, primarily the United States, and they are given to understand that they believe that the government can be overthrown by force, they will continue to try violence.
Some in the international media portray President Maduro as hugely unpopular within his country. We asked the Venezuelan public if they agree.
The president has great popular support. He has the support of the people. If the government did not have this support, they would have already fallen. It's because of this support that they remain.
They keep attacking. For one thing, he is one of the most attacked presidents in the world, and when they talk so much about a person, then he must be doing something good. We will demonstrate this 30th of July to show that he has popular support.
When the position of a group exceeds more than half, people have to stand up and say, "I'm not doing well," because they are our representatives. They are not the owners of the country. And that's why I consider that this group of elites want to shield themselves and keep in power regardless of the people.
In that case, there might be a minority that supports him from my point of view. They do not have majority support. The people get tired of this, and it is time for generational change.
It's false. Maduro wants us all to kneel down and steal all the goods we have in Venezuela.
Yes, there are international countries that support us, and others that support the opponents, but Venezuela have countries that support us like Russia, Bolivia, among others.
Two of the most important pollsters in Venezuela, Interlaces and data analysis, I may add, is on the side of the opposition, agree that the majority of Venezuelans do not want change of government. They believe that the government, 60 to 63% of the people in Venezuela want the government, the current government, to solve the serious economic crisis that the country is going through. This idea that President Maduro is hated by the majority of people in Venezuela is totally wrong. The numbers don't add up. And at the same time, what they want is they want stopped violence. 73%, according to Interlaces, and that analysis more or less agrees with this particular sort of poll, agree that they want to stop the violence, because the violence has gone far, too far, and people are fed up and people can't go around to do their own daily businesses. So we're talking about two different pollsters from two different sort of sides, if you like, of the spectrum of the Venezuelan politics, and they all agree that the majority of people are not prepared to accept regime change. I think that's the best way to counter-attack this idea that President Maduro is on his way out because the majority of people are against him.
There is discontent in Venezuela. The economic situation is difficult. Venezuela has been subjected to an economic war, which is, pretty openly declared by the enemies of the Bolivarian revolution. This economic war has the features of hoarding basic necessities, basic foodstuff and so on, forcing people to queue up. This goes into the black market, fueling inflation, the prices are absolutely unbelievable and so on, plus contraband, plus fracking, which has led to the plummeting of the price of oil. This is very, very difficult. So the fact that there is discontent doesn't mean necessarily the government is not popular, although it's lost some popularity. You can tell this by the 2015 National Assembly, when the government lost the election and the opposition won a majority. However, the opposition keep insisting that Chavismo has between 10 to 12%. This is repeated endlessly by the international media, literally every single day. If this were to be the case, why on earth did the opposition refuse to participate in the elections of the National Constituent Assembly? If you enjoy 80 to 85% of the vote, as they claim they do, and Chavismo enjoys only 10 to 12%, they could have won everything. By having control over the Constituent Assembly, they could have transformed the whole state if they wanted to. The fact that they didn't participate in the National Constituent Assembly is an indication actually they're not as strong and the government is not as weak as this suggests.
At least 94 people have died since opposition-led protests aimed at toppling the government began in April 2017. Over 1,200 have been injured in the protests. And is it all because of this statistic? The fact that Venezuela is estimated to have 298 billion barrels of oil, the largest reserves of any country in the world. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Could this have anything to do with the current crisis? We asked the Venezuelan public.
The empire, as it is called, has reached out to all the international conflicts that have taken place so far. That's why I do not care. My problem is Venezuela. It's food. It's what we're living in insecurity.
The United States is an international country. It is making social pressure because here there have been violations of everything. Human rights violations, violations of young students, and they have not addressed the root problem, which are the criminals.
The American government seeks control of our oil reserves. We know what happens in other governments in Africa, with the United States, France and Great Britain. They invent things to be able to steal the wealth of these countries and to seize the country itself.
What they want is to get the power from the government to transfer all our wealth abroad, giving all the wealth of the country to the lackeys of capitalism.
Yes, it has, but at the moment we are not producing much oil.
Venezuela is the biggest supplier of heavy crude to the United States of America. Most of the refineries run by US companies in the Gulf of Mexico depend heavily on supplies from Venezuela. Some refineries, for example, in Texas, are depending like almost 70% of their supplies of heavy crude to refine depend on Venezuela, which means that the US has a problem. They need this oil, which is the biggest, Venezuela being the biggest supplier of heavy crude, for the US. Which means that the US has a clear interest in getting cheaper oil and more facilities to be able to get the oil from Venezuela, which means that if the Venezuelan government decided to stop the supply of oil to the US because of this this situation, then the US would be in big trouble. And there are many companies who have made it very clear that they would be in trouble because the supply of heavy crude at the moment is quite low. So it's obviously in the interest of the US for the government of Maduro to fall so they can have an opposition government that will be able to give them cheap supplies of heavy oil for the refineries in the Gulf of Mexico and the southern part of the United States. So yes, oil is a big issue in the way the US is interfering in the internal affairs of Venezuela.
Chavez nationalized absolutely every aspect of the state oil company that was being privatized before and increased massively the tax on multinational companies that were operating in the country. Most of them were multinational companies for the United States. And you can see that Rex Tillerson, who was the CEO of Exxon and still somehow quite influential, is the state secretary of the United States. He's been, pretty much behind the whole offensive against Venezuela. I think at the end of the day, is Venezuela oil they want. Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil, and at the current level of consumption in the world, Venezuela has oil for the next 300 years. And even better from the point of view of the United States, were to lay their hands on Venezuelan oil. It takes about 4 to 7 days to ship oil from Venezuela to Texas to the United States, whereas from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, which is the main other supply, it takes between 38 to 45 days. You can see from the strategic point of view what they think. So this is the government of Venezuela that is using the oil for social progress is something that is problematical from the point of view of the United States. And therefore they're using the people who actually want to privatize it in order to, get into power by overthrowing the government of Venezuela.
President Maduro says that a constituent assembly is needed to bring peace to Venezuela. What does the Venezuelan public think of this move?
I do not agree with the Constituent Assembly. Why didn't they do it before when the oil price was very expensive? Why are they doing it now when the oil price is very cheap?
Strongly agree. That's why I am a candidate for the Constituent Assembly. I think it is one of the ways. We must work within the Assembly to generate a dialogue and contribute to peace.
There is a terrible crash between two trains, and in the middle we are the people. The opposition here, the government here, and the people.
Obviously, all the promises made by this governmental system will remain promises that ultimately seeks a utopia. That all the communist systems have been looking for from the theoretical point of view, it is valid, but historically has proved that it cannot be applied as such. It's utopia.
I do not think that the constituents will fix the problems that Venezuelans have. I think that dialogue between the two sides and helping the parts of the agriculture and business is more important. I think that there could be a beneficial agreement.
The constitution will not be changed. The constitution will not be rewritten. The constitution will not allow the president of Venezuela, Maduro, to stay in power longer than he should be. The constitution will introduce reforms which will include social organizations that were not part of the original constitution, which are now part of the Venezuelan society. That means they are going to institutionalize these organizations. At the same time, one of the objectives of the new Constituent Assembly would be to find measures to start a post-oil economy in Venezuela. Venezuela depends heavily on the export of oil. They are the mono exporters, Venezuela. What they want to do, they want to end this, they want to diversify their economy, so they stop depending so much on the oil, income for oil, and this constitution will introduce measures which will enable the economic structure of the country to create a post-oil economy. So the objectives of this constitution are very simple. They won't be rewritten, it won't be changed, it will be reformed, and it will introduce changes which will include this organization, which until now were not part of it.
Is that they want to maintain the 1999 constitution, but they want to give constitutional status to all the social missions that they have developed ever since roughly 2003. Remember, the constitution was enacted in 1999, but the social missions began to actually be implemented from 2003 all the way up to now. The housing mission, health mission, education, free education, and so on, which is a huge number of them. So the basic idea is to give them constitutional status so that to entrench them in the new constitution that is going to be produced. That's number one. Number two, at the level of the rank and file, at the level of the grassroots, there is a huge discussion which involves far beyond Chavismo. There is no question about it. There are literally, and this is not rhetorical exaggeration, there are literally every single day thousands and thousands and thousands of meetings at the grassroots level. They are discussing everything. What is wrong with the government? What needs to be done? What about the prices? What about inflation? What do we do to control the bureaucrat, corruption, and obviously the violence? And I think the people of Venezuela, by an immense majority, are convinced that through the Constituent Assembly they can stop violence, which is the key thing that they want. And number two, they think that they will empower themselves, and I think they are right. They will empower themselves so that they are able to take very strong measures and coherent measures to actually stop the economic speculation which is affecting their lives so badly. In terms of the prices, some of the prices are extremely inflated, 800% extra, 1,000%, 2,000% more than they should be charged. So I think they want to deal with that. And number three, they are convinced that they have, by this empowerment, the possibility to actually change the economic matrix of the country so that they don't depend so much on oil and they can diversify their economy.
Venezuela possesses the largest oil reserves in the world. Its independent foreign policy has angered and frustrated Washington for years. However, during the Chavez years, America simply had no mechanism to fulfill any potential regime change ambitions.
However, now with Chavez gone, many think the US seeks to force Venezuela into its sphere of influence, as President Maduro desperately seeks an electoral solution through a constituent assembly. The Venezuelan opposition is doing all it can to overthrow the government. The suspicion now is that America isn't just hoping for change in Venezuela, it's seeking that change, not by backing elections, but by promoting chaos.